All right, John Middlekauff, former NFL scout on the 3 and Out podcast for the Volume. Let's start. Philadelphia plays about as poorly as they can possibly play. This is the team you used to scout for. They have made sort of an art form out of sluggish wins. It's probably why I think I'd make them the favorite to win the Super Bowl this year. I thought they were so. In fact, it was my DraftKings bet of the week. I thought Buffalo and 4.5 was a great bet. Did you have your doubts in this one? Because it was so sloppy early.
Well, I mean, felt like a lock Buffalo win when it was 24-14 and they were in complete control. And then it went touchdown, Josh Allen interception, touchdown, and then they got the lead. And then he just went, well, this is the Philadelphia team we've seen all year. Because I don't think there's any player in the NFL who has looked as poorly in their parts of games and then turned the switch and looked like an MVP again. And maybe it's, Romo, they had talked about that, whatever it is, the deep thigh bruise or the injury that he's dealing with. It's not something that, you got a pain tolerance. Maybe as the game goes on, he gets a little looser because early on in games, there is no elite player who plays as crappy in the first half as Jalen. You look up at his stats early on in the first half, he had under 40 yards passing. And then all of a sudden you look at the end of the game, you're like, I thought the guy was awesome. He's been a crazy roller coaster ride, and it goes back. Josh Allen can't play much better. I mean, John Elway meets Cam Newton today, but the Bills just find ways to lose games this year.
I mean, they had 10 first half penalties. I counted 2 drops. I think. And I'll get into this later. When you watch, I watch what Sean Payton's doing in Denver, and they just don't make many mistakes. I don't think they're gifted. I think they have some really good players. Buffalo, I've compared them to Mike Tyson. They don't, Tyson at the end didn't have a jab, left himself wide open, but he had this vicious power. And so he swung from the heels. It was a little bit like Tiger coming out of his shoes as a golfer. It just made up. If the irons were off. And I look at Buffalo and I think, listen, there's not going to be a game this year that Philadelphia probably won't play that poorly for a half. There can be sluggish. And to me, if Buffalo can't win this game, right now, John, Denver is the hottest team in the league. Buffalo's, if the Chargers win tonight, does Buffalo feel like a playoff team to you?
They don't, because they can't win the games that they have to win. And tonight was a great example of their quarterback can't play any better. Their quarterback really this year, besides some of the primetime games, has been good. Statistically, he's top 5 in every metric. Yes. Some would argue he's been a top 2 or 3 quarterback, but today's a great example. Their defense let him down. To me, the final drive that led to the 60-yard field goal and then the final drive that led to the touchdown in overtime, I don't understand why you completely just let them get easy completions when all game long you have been playing normal defense. If they beat you, they beat you. It's a rainstorm. That field is slippery. Okay, if they hit some miraculous play, you tip your hat. But to just play, 8, 10, 12 yards off and give them completion after completion after completion with this offense, they're too potent once they get close. You saw on the final touchdown with Jalen Hurts, at any moment he can run it. And obviously they just got in field goal range. And honestly, if it wasn't for a Hall of Fame center making a couple shitty, weird plays, the pre-snap that cost them a couple yards, they would have had a 50-yard field goal, drove the field pretty easily. So, I do not think Buffalo is a playoff team. I'm with you. Denver is playing much better on defense, and there's a belief. Yes. I don't see how you lose this game if you're Buffalo and have any belief. I think this. You start looking around, you go, what else can we do?
Yeah, there's also, and I've beat on this now for 2 years, but there's 2 quarterbacks in this league that we feel are being let down by their coaching staff. Buffalo and the Chargers. Defensive head coaches, defensive cultures. And in both, they have one great receiver, capable backs, good enough O-lines, nice pass rushers, but we just feel like they're uneven, and the quarterback does all he can do. And I'll go back to saying, and I'll get into this in a bit, what Sean McVay is doing with this rickety, rebuilt, old or too young roster with the Rams, he's manufacturing points. I never feel like the Chargers, despite Kellen Moore, the Chargers or the Bills manufacture stuff. It's just Herbert, go make throws. Keenan Allen, go make catches. Josh Allen, be great. And listen, there's no again, it's if you're going to lose to anybody at Philadelphia late is about as good a loss as the NFL has. But I also think that there is something to be said about, Buffalo's not Green Bay. You have an owner and free agents would go there. But John, let's be honest about this. I think you have about 4 more years of Josh Allen in his prime because he takes too many shots. And then all of a sudden it's like, it's not the same and his contract's going to get bigger. I just kind of feel like they've blown it. I don't feel like Herbert's blown it yet because they could get the right coach. I don't think Buffalo's ever going to move off Sean McDermott.
Well, to me, if they were to do it and were to get a better coach and upgrade, which is going to be difficult, they would have a chance because the way that guy, when he is on like he was today, you're watching and you go, Mahomes has a better career resume and has more accomplishments, but like that version of Josh Allen, there's nothing quite like that. Right? I mean, that's like peak John Elway meets Cam Newton. Like you said, How long can you play like that? You can't really hit the quarterback as much anymore. But he did have the one play when Reddick got him early in the game. He got slammed like it was 1985.
Yeah.
I just wonder, the NFL, football is a team game, ultimately. Even if you have Peyton, there's a reason Peyton Manning didn't win as much as Tom Brady. His teams were never as good. Yeah. And I remember hearing stories when I was in the NFL that Tom Condon would get on the phone with Bill Polian, and Bill's like, we're not going to be able to buy any players. And Tom would say, more. And Peyton was always paid a premium, and their teams always had major flaws. And listen, Tom Brady looks like he's doing pretty well financially right now. Took a little bit less, and his teams were much more stacked. And that was a huge difference. And honestly, it wasn't until the end when Peyton got to Denver that he probably played on the most complete teams, but he was older. Can you imagine him in his peak and younger days? It would have.
And Elway made him take a bit of a pay cut. Remember, he and Elway had a little bit of a clash because John wanted Peyton to take less.
I just don't think you can play in the NFL like a basketball team where you're like, Giannis, Steph, just carry us. That's not the way it really works over the course of the season, especially when you run into good teams. And let's face it, when you shoot yourself in the foot, like the Bills did early in the season, there's too much to make up for. Now, the AFC, because of the injuries, is still not great, but it's hard to have much. I do think there's an emotional toll that losing in football takes on you, right? It's one thing if you lose, like if the Eagles would have lost this game, they could easily just shake it off. I think the Bills are at the point where that might just be the crushing blow for their season.
Yeah, and I don't want to be too punitive on Buffalo because if Gabe Davis turns the other way, they win the game. I mean, this whole world. You can go to Ohio State, Michigan. You can go to Washington State. These games are decided on inches, not feet. One play here and there. So I thought Buffalo, but it did feel like it's an accumulation of games blown and opportunities not seized. And I think that's going to be the season for Buffalo.
Well, I think, and Romo mentioned this, for the first time this year, they've had a little bit more consistent running game. Cook is, the best running back they've had. Well, if they would have had that look at the Eagles. At any moment, they can just hand it to a guy that their GM traded like 2075 fifth-round pick for, and they can control the ball on the ground, right? Because their quarterback also runs, yet the Bills finally can run the ball, and it's 2 years too late. Because if you would have put a running game on that team a couple years ago, maybe they're not playing at Kansas City in the second round, and that game's in Buffalo, and they're the number 1 seed. But like you said, there's a window because of the way finances work in the NFL. These contracts are not just equal year to year, right? Look at Deshaun Watson. This year it's $20 million on the cap. Next year it's 63. Like these swings dramatically impact your team. So it sucks if you're a Bills fan because they've been a franchise that was so terrible for so long, and they get this franchise quarterback, and now it feels like their finest moment was the blown 13-second game to the Kansas City Chiefs.
And Philadelphia can certainly win anywhere. They could win at Dallas. They could win at Detroit. They could win at San Francisco. But these wins matter. If you want to be the number 1 seed, also, it's a team that has some age up front. Philadelphia could certainly use a week off. Jalen Hurts is, like Travis Kelce, Jalen Hurts, Jason Kelce. These guys, I don't think they're ever at even 90% at this point. So I think Philadelphia is a team that could use a week off. So this win is not just another W. It goes a long way in the NFC home field advantage race.
Well, if they would have lost this game with the 49ers coming in with a lot of momentum, the extra couple days because they played on Thanksgiving, I would look at the NFC a lot different. Honestly, the Eagles, this game on Sunday doesn't they won the Chiefs game, they won the Bills game, they can lose the Niner game, whatever. Yep. But I think the Niners play the Ravens. It's not like the Niners are just going to cruise undefeated even if they beat the Eagles. So this game, honestly, with Detroit leaking oil, probably borderline solidifies their spot as the number 1 seed, which is huge. We saw it last year. The Niners had to go to Philadelphia. This is not Levi Stadium. I mean, it was rainy. It was cold. Not a soul in that stadium left it. The area embraces the ugliness, and it's just they're now built to play like that too.
Yeah, Philadelphia could rest starters in the final week, and if they got to the Super Bowl, gets 2 weeks for the Super Bowl. So it really feels like a magical year for Philadelphia. If you just keep winning games like this, there's a reason they do it. They're so situationally excellent. But it also, one of the things you worry about with Philadelphia is, Hurts, is Jalen healthy? They could rest starters absolutely in week 17.
Yeah.
As Detroit, as you said, leaks oil. San Francisco's also got some really tough games down the stretch, and also Super Bowl. So like even in like a cosmic way, if you could literally take a wand and go, okay, give Philadelphia a couple of weeks to get rest and healthy. Because I think San Francisco has the best roster. But listen, if you told me San Francisco, Philadelphia today, and it's in Philadelphia, I think it's one of the great games we've seen in recent years, but I'd have to lean Philly. I really would.
You know, I saw your take last week about Jalen's composure and the way he acts in front of a press conference and how impressive he is. Doesn't that carry over to the way he plays?
Yeah.
Good, bad, or indifferent. I mean, he scores a game-winning touchdown. He acts no different than when he's got 20 yards in the first half. Meanwhile, his coach jumping up and down, acting like an idiot. Jalen's the opposite. I mean, let's face it, Sirianni's a little over the top for my liking, but Jalen is actually much more coach-like in his mannerisms and the way he conducts himself as a player. They score touchdowns, unfazed, not celebrating. If you're an Eagle fan, to have that Carson Wentz situation and to pivot to this guy, it's an all-time football heaven throwing you a bone move, because that's a pretty special player.
We could talk about a variety of things. I do want to talk about Sean Payton and what he's done for Russell Wilson. They are now the hottest team in the NFL. And I mean, we all know coaching matters. There's nobody disputes that. But I'm watching them today. They have really figured out Russell Wilson. He can throw for 135 yards. He had 8 rushes. You could tell very early in the game, Sean's like, Russ, there's going to be real limitations on throwing the ball down the field. I need you to run. The game plan was clearly run the football, screen it, mitigate their pass rush with Cleveland, a lot of screens, Russ, anytime you can run. They were trying to keep the Cleveland defense as passive as they could on screens and Russell running, slowed him down a little bit. But as I watched that game, I think this is it's listen, we always knew that Sean Payton had a winning record with Bridgewater, Taysom Hill, Drew Brees. I don't know if he did with Jameis Winston, but it was close. So he's won with stylistically different guys. But Russell Wilson is absolutely, and I know this to be true, he's a difficult quarterback for Sean Payton. His style isn't Sean's. This isn't what Sean would handpick, right? And so it's just different. I'm watching that game today, and I'm like, it is amazing when a quarterback plays to his strengths, how good suddenly Denver's roster looks. Simmons, the safety, Surtain, DJ Jones in the middle. By the way, Mims can be wildly explosive. Cortland Sutton's always been talented. They'll get Dulcich back at tight end, but their tight end made a great catch today. Williams and Pirine are really strong, very similar style backs. Both can catch. O-line, I thought today, did a pretty good job of protecting Russ. Suddenly the quarterback play, you look around, you're like, oh, you know what? Denver's pretty good. How good are they, do you think?
Well, I mean, I think Russ these last couple of weeks is carrying himself a little old school, moving around. I mean, he had some runs today. You're like, wow, where has that been? You know, when everyone was being critical last year and early in this season. To me, he's dramatically better. But I think what Sean's really proven is being a head coach is more than just being a play caller, right? We saw it with Nathaniel Hackett, who's proven not to be a very good play caller either, overwhelmed by everything else. Early on in the season, everybody and their mother is saying, Vance Joe, 70 points, you got to fire him. He was able to just kind of ride out the storm. Locker room lawyer, some older guys with big money probably doing who knows what to his younger players. Frank Clark, Randy Gregory, get out of my locker room. When you watch them today, Cleveland easily has been not just the best defense in the NFL, but the most physical defense in the NFL.
Yes.
I thought Denver was every bit as physical, flying around crushing people. So he has maintained a level of improving Russell and getting Russell to just go more like he was in his younger days in Seattle. And the defense, which, again, Colin, they scored 20 points in the game and still lost by 50. Like, that could be a fireable offense on its own, but he stuck with them. You watch Vance Joseph right now, these last couple weeks, their defense is playing really good. So that, the Raiders are they're just okay. The Chargers, you can never trust. Obviously, the Chiefs are going to be fine. But you look at the AFC, I mean, I do not trust Pittsburgh at all. I mean, at one point in time in the game, I thought, is this Mike Tomlin's last year? Like, is this all she wrote for him? He just fires a coordinator. They're down early to Jake Browning. Jake Browning's beating them. Now, they ended up coming back, and their offense looked a little bit better. But no one cares how many yards you get when you score 16 points, right? The point of it, you got to score some points, which you cannot trust them to do.
Right.
So, yeah, I mean, I would say, beside a couple teams in the AFC, which would obviously be the Chiefs and the Ravens, I don't think you can I mean, look at the Browns today, right? They are supposed to be, and they have been, even with the random quarterback play, easily one of the best teams in the AFC. Denver kicked their ass today. That was not a tight game. That was not Eagles-Bills going back and forth. That was, we are better than you, shoving you around.
Yeah, and they're pretty lucky that, again, they get the tight end back, so they're pretty lucky right now with their health. And you start looking at the AFC is, Kansas City will be ready to play. Baltimore hasn't had playoff success. We think they're excellent. It thins out pretty quick. Neither one of us trust the Jags in a big spot, or Houston. So you start looking at the AFC, we look at this power conference, and I'm like, Denver's style of play, John. Defense is young and fast. They're running the ball. It's a screen run game. So that's kind of bulletproof against bad weather. And I look at them and I think, I could see them going to Baltimore. I could absolutely see them going. I take Kansas City out of it. But I mean, Miami. If Miami and Denver play today, I could see that being a completely ugly, first of all, the pass rush.
Dolphins' best pass rusher just tore his Achilles, Jalen Phillips.
So to me, I look at Denver, and it's not crazy if you look at the momentum. If they remain healthy, outside of going to Kansas City or maybe Baltimore, they can play with anybody.
I will say this about Kansas City, and listen, it's like Kerr and Curry. Like, you never feel bad about betting on those guys in a big game. It doesn't mean they're always going to win it, though. And I would say this about Travis Kelce. I was talking to someone about this a couple days ago. He's kind of looked old this year.
Oh, yeah.
And part of it, he had knee injury right before the season started. He's had ankle injuries. He just kind of looks old. And this is the NFL, where you don't always see it coming. I mean, he's one of the greatest players of all time. He's one of my favorite players to watch. But he's looked his age a little bit. And he's no longer, and their receivers are young. There was a report today they've had to do some extra film work about some adjustments. That's a work in progress. Maybe it's just like Belichick and Brady didn't win the Super Bowl every year. Remember, the Jets got him one year. They got taken down every once in a while. And maybe just this, even watching today against the Raiders, who I don't think are very good, was a pretty tight game for a while. Now, the Chiefs are ultimately better. They got a better coach and obviously a better quarterback. But you watch them, you go, I don't know. Because if Travis is no longer an A-plus player, and let's say he's a B-minus player, well, the rest around there, they're so dependent on their defense, which is good.
Yes.
But, you go against Lamar, you go against it. Like, the game could get weird, and all of a sudden you just lose a 19-17 playoff game. And that's what I think they've opened themselves up to for the first time. To me, Travis flying to Taylor and being in love, it has nothing to do with that. It's simply, he's a 34-year-old guy with a lot of miles on his body who's starting to get banged up, and his game's very predicated on athleticism, right? The movement, speed, explosiveness, and it just feels like a step slow this year.
Yeah, and continuing on with the Chiefs and the Raiders, you're talking about an interim coach, an immobile backup quarterback.
Yeah.
And that game was 14-14, and I until about 7 minutes left, until that big Rashee Rice touchdown, I was like, or that big play by him, I forgot if it was a touchdown, but it was like...
Yeah, it was a touchdown. He cut it back.
Okay. And my takeaway was a real game. And here's the thing about those players. So Watson's not a great athlete. Rashee Rice is a great athlete, but he's inexperienced. Tony's more of a gadget player who I don't trust. Yeah. He's got very regrettable hands. So, and Sky Moore is just a guy. So you start looking around, they don't have a number one. I think Rice to me feels like he'd be a really, really explosive 2 with like one talent, more of a 2. And a lot of this stuff is that these guys come out of college, John. They're not always like Josh Allen. They're not always particularly well coached. They don't have the route tree down. They just need time. I mean, tight ends historically struggle in year 1. Where some receivers, the great ones like Jamar, Justin Jefferson can make an impact. In most cases, though, it's because the quarterback's really good, right? It helps to have Burrow or even a veteran like Kirk Cousins. But I just look at Kansas City. And I said this last week, they've moved into the second phase of the dynasty. The first phase is Mahomes is cheap. They can play down 21, up 21. They look faster, smarter, and they have a ton of weapons. Phase 2, they've entered. Travis Kelce, their best player, is wobbling. They've had to move off players because of Mahomes now is expensive. Their defense is the best it's been. So they're now carried kind of by their defense. And so it's like phase 2 for the Patriots was no Super Bowls. Now they got to them, they were close, but phase 1 was Tom was a game manager becoming a big time player, defense. Phase 2 was the Randy Moss Welker, which was explosive, almost offensive led. And then phase 3 was Tom, Edelman, Gronk. He got his favorite weapons ever. Excellent O-line play. And it was a combination of they could be explosive, but they weren't as explosive as Moss, right? And I think with Kansas City, they're just not as explosive. They can't play down 21-0 to teams. So that's why, by the way, if you've noticed, John, they don't experiment as much. They're pretty good on script early now because I think they know. I think initially with Patrick, you could roll the dice. I think they come in scripted. They need a lead. Well,
I thought last year was going to be their transitional year. It turns out they won the Super Bowl. But it turns out this year is. And I think this offseason, I think it's going to be very difficult for them to win the Super Bowl. Doesn't mean they can't, because their head coach is an all-timer and their quarterback's an all-timer. And if your defense is good, you can stay in games. And Andy's willing to run it. Why? He doesn't have a choice. I mean, Pacheco's easily a second-best offensive player. You could argue if Kelce's not elite anymore, he's every bit as good as him, at least impactful to the offense. So I think big picture in the offense, they're going to address tight end in the offseason. Andy historically is always big game hunted. He traded for Terrell Owens once upon a time. He always drafts skill guys high. I think tight ends and wide receivers are going to be a huge point of emphasis for them this offseason because this quarterback's not going anywhere. And the difference with Tom, right? They did get him Randy in his prime, but for the most part, he dealt with underneath wide receivers, loved it that way. Mahomes is a deep ball thrower. Like if Diggs isn't on the team next year with Josh Allen, you're going to want a player that can get down the field because that is a massive strength and he's willing to do it. So I would expect them to be pretty aggressive this offseason for getting more speed, but it's going to be difficult the way, just their wide. You can only do so much. I don't care how great a coach Andy is to have these guys make plays. Like when Rice made that play, you're like, God, I haven't seen a Chief do this in a while.
All right, there's so much to be thankful for over the holiday weekend. Friends and family, food and football, especially NFL. New customers at DraftKings Sportsbook. Download the app. Full weekend of action, full week of action. Right now, $5. New customers can bet just $5 on the NFL to score $150 instantly in bonus bets. You bet $5, you get $150. Money lines, props, live bets, and so much more. No matter your appetite, there is something for you at DraftKings Sportsbook. Download the app now. The code is Colin, COLIN. New customers bet $5 on the NFL and get $150 instantly in bonus bets only on DraftKings Sportsbook, the official sports betting partner of the NFL. The code is always Colin, COLIN. The crown is yours. November is here. We are in the heart of the football season. Hockey and basketball just starting up. Best way to get tickets to any of these games is on Game Time, the fastest growing ticket app in the United States. Game Time. It's obsessed with finding ways to help you save money on tickets. That's what they do. You can find exclusive flash deals, ways to help you save money, sponsored deals on games and concerts on a daily basis. Pretty sweet. With zone deals, you pick the section you want and Game Time picks the seat. Big time savings there. And with a game time guarantee, you'll always get the best price. You'll find tickets in the same section, same row, for less. Game time will credit 110% of the difference. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets and go with Game Time, the fastest growing ticket app in the United States. Download the Game Time app. Create an account. The redeem code is Colin. That's me, Colin. $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account. The redeem code Colin. $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute deals. Lowest priced tickets. Guaranteed. All right, so I want to go back to a game on Thanksgiving, which there's two stories on the Packers game and the Lions game. First of all, it's the second game in a row where Jordan Love had real life. And I think he's a player. Baker Mayfield's like this. Baker relies a great deal on confidence. And when Baker loses it, he's not the same quarterback. Jordan Love, clearly in the last 2 weeks, now I could argue it's the coaching and the secondary of the Chargers and the bad secondary for the Lions. It's a big part of that. But be that as it may, Green Bay has drafted very good young receiver tight end talent. Excellent. From Musgrave, Watson, Dobbs. There's some really nice players here. So let's start with the Packers, and then we'll pivot to the Lions. I said this with Kenny Pickett. I feel like I see what he is, and I don't think you can win big. Do you have a different opinion of Jordan Love today, John, as a former scout?
Yeah, listen, I mean, when you're a young player, you can only react to what you see, and early on he was terrible. But looking back, you go, he hadn't really played football. The difference, though, is he was not a rookie, right? He had been in the league a little longer, so I think your expectations are a little higher, especially what you're used to seeing at those colors on a quarterback on that franchise. And he looked anemic. But these last 2 weeks, obviously, let's even throw the Charger game away. Short week on the road, Thanksgiving. You're a long way into the season. Your body's probably a little tired. Those first couple drives, Colin, Kenny Pickett, and let's throw Mac Jones, who's worse than Kenny Pickett, they don't have the physical characteristics of this guy. Like, this guy does have a big, powerful arm.
Moves really well.
Yeah, I mean, I tend to because I come from the Andy Reid school of the more physically gifted guys and try to figure it out. But those guys miss just as much as the low, ceiling, high floor guys. But at least when a guy kind of hits like Jordan Love has been lately, you go, God, they might have some. God, they might be alive. What if they're actually kind of good? Because offensively, they have a lot of speed outside, right? A lot of speed. An offensive head coach who's literally calling the play so he can impact the guy. Like, ultimately, Mike Tomlin or Belichick, like they could yell at the quarterback, they could motivate the quarterback, but they can't impact the play calling on a play-to-play basis. The head coach is in full control there. Him and Jordan, it's why you see, if you watch a Packer game, when it was going bad, now that's going good, those guys spend a lot of time together. So, yeah, I'm much more bullish on it, because how could you not be? If you just watch the last 2 weeks, whether you thought he was bad, which I did, you'd go, that guy looks like a really good quarterback. Now, can he maintain it into December? Time will tell. He gets a long break. He should be more rested this upcoming week, but there's no disputing he kicked their ass. Now, they are not playing very well at all. That secondary is a major problem. It's hard. I have to drop them above the other three teams, obviously the Niners, Dallas, and Philly, because that secondary, like they will get beat by any of those three teams pretty easily if that's the way they're going to play. But this is the NFL, man. Thursday night or Thursday morning in Detroit, it's a huge – when's the last time a home game we went in for Detroit thinking, easy? They were a huge favorite in that game, and they got worked. The final score was not as close as what we witnessed.
Well, and the other thing about Jordan Love is, initially, I still think he's sort of an erratic thrower. He tends to be like a streaky shooter in the NBA. He's a little streaky. Like, he'll have – and sometimes I think the more athletic guys, Mahomes, this is certainly true. Lamar, it's true. Josh Allen, it's true. They can go off into the weeds. Like mechanically, when you're so gifted, like Brady had to be efficient with his mechanics. Like, guys know who can be and who isn't. And so sometimes when I watch Jordan, he's a little loose. And I think because he got away with it in high school, college, probably gets away with it at practice. And you can see in games sometimes he just gets away with it. But I will say this, when you watch a lot of these quarterbacks that don't work, one of the things that just jumps out to you is they're just not gifted. There's not a lot of secret sauce there. Right. Yeah. Jordan Love moves really well. I don't think he has a huge arm, but he has a good arm, but he moves easy. It's just very easy for him to drift outside and head upfield. And it's like, that also, John, buys you for about 2 years, buys you time at the line of scrimmage, is running for first downs.
Well, even if they don't make the playoffs this year, and I wouldn't put $1,000 on him right now to make the playoffs, but if he has 2 more of those over the next 6 or even 2.5, 3 games like that, splits it, he's going to be their quarterback next year. And obviously they would win games. They would take themselves out of drafting the guys high. So yeah. I think he's already kind of borderline done that, where he just could help them take a deep breath, keep loading up the team. On the flip side, one thing I wrote down on Thursday night, Gino was really impressive. And the more we've got to know him as a starting quarterback, he's an easy guy to root for, how he conducts himself, just the way he's just handled the ups and downs of his career. He's just not good enough. And to me, ultimately, at least with Jordan, I don't know if he is either, but he's young. There's a lot to work with. He's not making
enough. He's cheap.
Now Gino makes a lot of money. So Seattle, it's been impressive how they've pivoted away from Russ and they've kept maintaining. Well, now they play the Cowboys on Thursday night. I don't know about you. I don't like them in that game. So all of a sudden they're kind of leaking oil. And you go, it's not, they got talent everywhere now. They've done a good job of drafting. They already had some players when he showed up, but he's kind of their problem. And they're going to win enough games where it's 8 or 9. Maybe they're the 7th seed. Yeah. How are they going to get a quarterback? Hope to draft a guy in the second round and keep their fingers crossed?
So, let's go back to Green Bay, Detroit, because with Detroit, I always felt like you become your coach. And so Dan Campbell is big and he's relentless and he's emotional. And I think that's great. But emotion doesn't equal wins. And I think the first couple of years with Dan, we were all blown away by his ability. The team played hard. I mean, they were flawed, but they played really hard. And I still think they play really hard. But we've seen a couple of moments. That Baltimore game was embarrassing. This game was embarrassing, where there is, you start looking around at the coaches that have rings, the Belichick's, the Andy Reid's, the Sean McVays. There is an intellectual level, Sean Payton's, that you start getting upstairs to the highest levels of these games, and they're all situational. And I just wonder, is Dan more emotion driven? There's nothing wrong with it. Pete Carroll can do some of that, but Pete's legendary for his meetings and situational football. This franchise to me right now, Detroit, feels like, have they emotionally peaked? Do they have a second gear?
Well, I think there's 2 parts to the NFL. College is a lot about motivation once you have really good players. It's why once Urban got to Jacksonville, it was like none of that stuff matters. It's about the scheme, because the NFL is a scheme game, basically Monday through Friday, a game plan. Motivation when you're really a bad team, like what he took over, matters. So when he got to Detroit, they needed some confidence. They needed a guy out in front willing to take it. Well, these last couple of weeks, you have enormous holes in your secondary. And the secondary, the schematics in the secondary are probably the most complex. Most people aren't very good at it, even in the NFL. Well, he can't impact it at all. There's nothing he can do. So as a head coach, he can motivate. He can stay on these guys. Mike Tomlin, same thing with his quarterback. He can't do anything. So it's like the motivation, you have to change your coverages, whatever that may be. It's always been a point of differentiation when Bill and Tom work together, is like Bill could impact schematically every position, every unit. Well, Dan, now they're going through a little adversity. They're good enough that they're going to end up winning some, more than enough games to win the division and host a playoff game. But do you feel as good now about them in the first round of the playoffs? Definitely not in the second round if they got to go on the road to, let's say, San Francisco. And to me, it gets back to, I'm a Dan Campbell guy, because I do think the people that believe in you matters to me. And Bill Parcells and Sean Payton were his 2 biggest proponents. Yeah. But he does have a flaw. Most offense, Andy Reid doesn't know that much about defense in terms of relative to, I think, what the average person is going to think, why he needs a strong defensive coordinator. When you give him Spags, when you give him Jim Johnson, he's kicking a lot of ass, taking a lot of names. Well, now they because of personnel, some injuries, I don't really know what Dan can do, right? Because his specialty, motivate the D-line, but the secondary is more about pure scheme. It's all my mind versus your mind, putting our guys in position, and that's going to be a fatal flaw for them just moving forward, because he doesn't have a pitch there.
All right, I want to talk Jim Harbaugh in a second, John, but I do want to go back to, because of my, from the Northwest, and you're a Niners guy. So we know San Francisco's really good, and you touched on it with Seattle, but Seattle's in a very interesting spot. So Chicago's going to get the number 1 pick via Carolina, and they're going to take Caleb Williams. And so everybody is going to Arizona's not going to keep that number. I mean, they may and take Harrison. I could see them keeping Marvin Harrison because he's so good, but I could also see them getting a boatload of picks and going and getting other receivers. I'm not sure which way they'll go. Harrison's so gifted, so Randy Moss, they probably do. And so the third team, there could be a bidding war for that. It's New England, whatever it is. New England's going to draft a quarterback. But Seattle is one of those teams. They don't have a lot of holes on this roster. I could see if I ran the Seahawks, I thought watching Geno Smith, who's, regressed to the mean. He is what he is. He bombed. People forget how badly he bombed in New York. He was awful. Maybe not Zach Wilson bad, but he was awful. And so eventually, people get a year of film on him. You can see some of his teammates barking. People are getting frustrated. Seattle has enough depth at running back, at wide receiver. I even think at corner. I wonder if Seattle just says, we're going all in on getting up there and getting that quarterback, maybe Bo Nix, or if New England took a Bo Nix over Drake May. Because Seattle's one of those teams that's very hard to do, bring a rookie quarterback in and give up massive draft capital and players. But if Seattle said, we'll give you a DK Metcalf. We got these 2 young receivers. We'll go draft another. It's a good receiver draft. We'll give you DK Metcalf. We'll give you 3 number 1s. I think it makes they've drafted so well, John, for 2 straight years. They've hit about 8 home runs. I wonder if Seattle just says, we can give up some draft picks here.
I've been getting texts for years, and it's been reported, back with the Josh Allen stuff, but over the last couple of years, John Schneider has been scouting these guys heavily. I mean, all the top quarterbacks he sees live, which is not normal for general managers. And I think last year they went into the season thinking, we're going to take one of these guys. And what happens? Geno career year, throws 30 touchdowns. It was awesome. And they had a spot at where they drafted last year because of the trade. They were at number 5. They easily could have got to 3 and taken Anthony Richardson, who would have kind of been their version of Josh Allen from years before. Remember, that pissed Russell Wilson off when they were thinking about sniffing around trying to get up and get him. And they didn't do it. And I think they're not going to make that mistake again. And I'm with you. You remember Dimitroff once upon a time got from the 20s to get Julio Jones at 6. Andy once upon a time came from the mid-20s, get up, I think, 10 or 12, whatever Mahomes was. I think they're going to have to do that because the Niners are much better than them. But One major difference is Brock Purdy's better than Geno Smith.
Yes.
Right? So it's like you can't forever with Russell Wilson for whatever reason. Back to Harbaugh through Kyle, they kind of own the Niners. They beat the Niners all the time. Well, the Niners are now, including the playoffs, 4-0 in the last year and a half. And it's most of those games have not felt that close. They've had moments in the game, but over the totality of the 60 minutes, the Niners have separated themselves, and they're kicking Geno Smith's ass. And I think that was a big reason why the Rams kind of soured on Goff is when you're not a super mobile guy and don't have a super high ceiling, the Niners pass rush can just engulf you. And Stafford helped obviously the Rams in that NFC Championship game. Geno has not been able to overcome that. And honestly, he hasn't looked very good against them at all, beside a drive here and a drive there. But the game, and ultimately, if you're them, you're a couple players away probably from being a Super Bowl contender, but you have no chance to beat the 49ers to win the division, who are probably going to run the table again and win the division by several games because of that player. So historically, they've been one of the most, would you say them, Andy Reid, Howie Roseman, more aggressive organizations? They haven't all worked. Jimmy Graham, Percy Harvin. Why the hell wouldn't they do that for a quarterback? So I'm with you. They have, a DK Metcalf, maybe one of their corners, not the rookie, but they got a guy that they could throw in there to also intrigue with maybe 2-1. So just throw a Hail Mary because without that position, you could have 2 DK Metcalfs and Geno Smith. You're probably getting bounced in the first round no matter what.
Yeah, if you bring a rookie quarterback in, you don't want to do what Carolina did and have no receivers for Bryce Young. So what if you could draft somebody and get a DK Metcalf comes in as your one if you've got other sort of pedestrian wide receivers, that's ideal to me. Tom Telesco told me this. He goes, you don't want too many draft picks. You don't want to be too young. See, he goes, ideally, when you give up a lot, you'd like to get a veteran player, a productive player. Draft picks, even in the first round, 30% miss. So I think Seattle could give a team, one of those teams in the top 5 or 6 and just say, here, we'll give you a star receiver. We'll give you our number 2 corner. We draft very well. We develop well. Pete always has. And we'll give you 2 ones. That, to me, would be much more enticing than a million draft picks.
I'm a huge believer, and part of it is just the people that are coming out now in the draft are no longer look like Peyton Manning, Carson Palmer, and Tom Brady. Mobility is such a huge element in today's game. You saw it on full display with Josh Allen and Jalen Hurts today. When you watch Brock Purdy, I don't think we give him enough credit for just mobility to keep plays alive.
Yes.
And when you look at the other teams, Seattle, Detroit, that aren't, Dak Prescott can move. Jalen Hurts can move. Brock Purdy can move. I'm not talking, Jalen runs more than Dak and Brock. Those guys extend the play outside the tackle, and usually you can't cover forever. The receivers, these guys practice so many of these kind of, scramble drills. You hit them, it feels like more than half the time on a big play. And if you don't hit them, you get a lot of pass interferences. So to me, the mobility, and look at this draft class, right? Bo Nix, Drake May, all these guys can move. Even if J.J. McCarthy were to come out, Caleb Williams, athlete. Penix would be the one guy who's more of a throwback, and he throws such a beautiful ball, but it's just hard to draft a guy who's not a great movement guy in today's day and age, isn't it?
I want to talk some Harbaugh. I want to go in on Harbaugh. So let's do some Michigan, Ohio State. So the 3 best teams, in my opinion, in the country, and I don't think there's a great deal separating them: Georgia, Oregon, Michigan. I could argue, I think I would take Ohio State over Alabama and Texas, but it's inches, not feet. I think Ohio State's a really good team. I thought they played really, really well. They just couldn't make stops. But here's my takeaway is that everybody wants to play that 4 team. Michigan, Georgia, and Oregon, they don't want to play each other first. Right? You want to play that 4 team. And so my guess is Texas, if they win out, Texas is your 4 because they beat Alabama, and should be. I would take Ohio State to beat them, but Ohio State lost late. Texas,
Florida State.
I disqualify them for not having a quarterback, and I think it's the weakest conference. And I know people get upset, but it's almost like, remember years ago in the NCAA tournament when Cincinnati, Kenyon Martin broke his leg before the tournament, and it's like, well, you're not a number 1 seed anymore because he was like one of the players of the year. You're not the same team. So a backup quarterback's not, I don't think, going to compete against Georgia, Oregon, Michigan. And you can say whatever you want about that, but that's just the reality of it. I mean, the odds will change now. So if Florida State gets in, you and I know that's who all those teams want to play first. They want to play Florida State first. But I was thinking about this. If you're thinking about Oregon, or let's just say it's Georgia and Michigan, and they both went out, could I not make the argument that Michigan's ability, so it's the duality of life, your weakness becomes your strength, Michigan's ability to win 2 huge road games without their coach on the sideline actually would make me say, I think Michigan's number 1. That in a weird way, it would get them the number 1 seed over Georgia. Is that crazy?
No, that was a really impressive win yesterday. Because Ohio State, to me, one knock on Ryan Day, he's always kind of had this Chip Kelly, a little soft, right? A lot of offense. Defensively, they are dramatically better. But that was a very, very impressive loss. I mean, his last 2 losses, Georgia and Michigan, obviously the Michigan game was a more physical game in terms of lower scoring. We're just, I have a little more respect for Ryan Day than some of these people say him running out of town. They run a high-level program, clearly. But for Michigan to play like at multiple times in that game when it was tied, a lot of teams without their coach and their leader would have crumbled, especially their quarterback had come into the game not playing well. There was a togetherness of the group. Now, they obviously have a lot of guys that easily could have gone to the NFL. It's a very unique team, but that was now they were at home, but to win that game, I have a hard time. Georgia's clearly not as good. They're just not. You can't lose the caliber of NFL players for back-to-back years and be as good this year. Doesn't mean they haven't recruited at the highest level and they're not going to win more national championships. Nick Saban did win national championship every year.
That's right.
He skipped some years. And to me, Oregon, it's pretty crazy that Washington can't remember the last time they lost a game, Colin. Definitely in the regular season. It's been a while. By the time that game kicks off, what are they going to be, a 10-point underdog?
Oh, no, Oregon is a 9.5-point favorite. So I made this argument. I think Oregon's the best team I've seen. So of the three quarterbacks, Carson Beck, J.J. McCarthy, and Bo Nix right now is the best of the three because of the system. Their offensive line is fantastic. They're big everywhere. They've got weapons. I think they're as well coached a team. They don't fumble. They don't have penalties. Today, I don't know what Vegas would say. I think Oregon's the best football team. I've seen them live twice. I've watched them on TV another 2-3 times. I think Oregon's the best team I've seen, better than Michigan.
I'll say this. JJ played a lot better against Ohio State than he had the previous couple weeks, just in terms of some enormous third and fourth down plays, made some plays with his legs, made some great passes into tight windows. Like that version, he's going to have to be better than that to win a national championship, but was closer to the guy that I think through the early half of the season when they were playing, the school of the blind and who knows who, people were talking about him as a first round pick. He showed flashes again and clearly outplayed the Ohio State quarterback. To me, Oregon has just been consistently the best team start to finish. They have had no hiccups. Because even their loss, you went, God, they were incredible. It was just a fourth down play. They easily could have. I think, are we underestimating Washington a little bit, though? Because defensively, they've been a lot better the last couple of weeks. Offensively, they're so predicated on the pass that scares you a little bit. The balance isn't always there. But I do wonder, because I think everyone and their mother is going to pick Oregon and hammer them 10, 11 point as a favorite. Could the game be a little close? There are going to be a lot of Washington fans there. This game, I think it was sold out like 3 weeks ago. So it's going to be bananas.
I'm going to the game. No, I think what Washington does is they have an ability to have a bad half, trail anybody, Michigan, Texas, Oregon, Georgia, by 21 and never be out of it. Because Adunze is a great receiver. He'll be a first-round guy. They have two other NFL receivers, probably second, third-round guys. So they have an effective tight end. They get good pass protection. Now, Penix, I thought, was really off. But again, Northwest, cold. It's not, he played at Corvallis in a rainstorm. And then, on short time, he comes back in a huge, by the way, all these underdogs, Auburn against Alabama, Ohio State was an underdog to Michigan. Listen, the underdog always has an advantage emotionally. You're just banging the drum all week. Nobody believes in us. So Washington State, Cam Ward played a couple of great throws. Washington has the ability to be outplayed and win. I thought they were outplayed by Oregon, and they just won because, they listen, in the NFL, outside of the Jets, nobody has two elite corners. Well, in college, forget about it. And so if you have three NFL receivers, John, they just have matchup. Even Oregon was blanketing them, and the guys made catches. So I think Washington has the ability, and this is not all college good teams have this. They can play poorly and win because of their passing offense.
I do think back to Florida State, and listen, I follow the program closely. I know their GM well. They have an NFL roster. Their backup quarterback also got knocked out, so the third stringer came in by the end of the game. I do think because next year's going to the 12 team, if the 14 playoff was just going to be, let's just say at minimum another decade going, it would be hard for them to do, because then it would set the precedent of leaving undefeated Power 5 team out. I do wonder if the 12 team next year, it's easier for them just to go, listen, your third string quarterback's in, you're no longer the same team. Because I think that would be pretty controversial, right? Because a lot of people were saying, well, what if Alabama, who easily could have lost, took great throw by Milroe, but they did not deserve to win that game. Obviously, it's going to be difficult for them to beat Georgia, but what if they do? Then everyone's going to be, does Alabama and Georgia, then all the SEC haters get involved. Well, Texas beat Alabama. Now, you could say that's week 3, but still, what's the point of the games? Yeah, they played the game and they beat them.
Yeah, if Georgia loses to Bama, and I think it's Georgia wins, because I think Carson Beck's the best quarterback they've had in this run. Then I would not have an SEC team in. And by the way, Georgia loses late. Alabama lost at home. I've always looked at how do you lose? Like Oregon losing on a last-second field goal on the road in which they outplayed a team, arguably, that's a great loss early in the season.
Yeah.
Alabama losing at home is not a good loss. Now, it's close. Killed. Yeah, they got pushed around. So it does matter when you lose, how you lose. Like, I think if Ohio State had lost to Michigan 4 weeks ago, I could make an argument. I think they're better than Texas and Bama. I would have no problem putting Ohio State in as long as they didn't have to play Michigan again. If they met Michigan in the national, because years ago LSU and Bama met again in the national championship, and so I think it's a disadvantage for Michigan. Michigan would fight against it. It's not good for them, but I just things change. The reality is Florida State's now on a backup to a backup in a weak conference. I don't buy it.
One story I always find funny is when a guy, kind of gets in some hot water in college with the NCAA or, weird stuff going on. And people go, would the NFL still be interested in him? Like when Pete Carroll left, it's like the NFL does not care one iota about some Marine with a phone at Iowa, Nebraska. They haven't thought more than 10 seconds about it. Just like when Pete Carroll had who knows what doing what. It didn't cross their mind for once. Chip Kelly was in trouble, left. No one cares. Harbaugh's value to me is higher than ever. I would say it was down a couple years ago. He's definitely got it back because they're running an NFL program. Honestly, Ryan Day really impressed me. That was an impressive outing by Ohio State because they had got the knock, and I know he freaked out at Lou Holtz earlier in the season. They were soft. Like I don't think it was uncalled for by people questioning their toughness. And they're a much tougher program. I mean, they were right there with Michigan. Now, can you lose to a rival when you have the highest payroll for a coaching staff when their head coach is at home in his shorts eating a hot dog? That's a tough. It's one thing to lose to Harbaugh straight up, right? I think it's hard to lose to the O-line coach who's 37 years old. These people pay so much money. It was kind of another take I have is, listen, I understand for Casey Wasserman is a very successful individual and for whatever reason loves Chip Kelly, but they had the opportunity. They're going to the Big Ten now to get rid of him and hire Jonathan Smith, who I think every Power 5 AD and every Power 5 head coach would say Jonathan Smith in 2023 is a much better coach than Chip Kelly. Well, Michigan State, who they're going to start playing and is in gets that guy, which I don't blame Jonathan Smith. Oregon State and Washington State did everything right over the last decade and they got screwed, the economics of the sport, whatever. But he had to leave but they upgraded the coach. I mean, to me, that's a solid addition by Michigan State. And to me, UCLA, I watched a decent amount of that game before I went to sleep. Cal kicked his ass. And let's face it, Cal plays a lot like a Big Ten team. Physicality, what he handles Lincoln. Well, what's Lincoln? More of a spread Big 12 team. I don't know. I think that Chip Kelly's lost 3 of 4. Some bad losses, Colin.
All right, John Middlekauff, 3 and out at the Volume. Great seeing you as always, John. Appreciate it.
Yeah, happy Thanksgiving, Colin. See you soon.